Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Ah, Smart Water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart Water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible. Financial geniuses. Monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
It's Sunday afternoon. The bar doors swing open and you're just swallowed by the roar of sound. All around, screens are flashing the Giants versus Chargers game. Bar stools and booths take the place of bleacher seats, but the energy is the same. You got wings and baskets, napkins are soaking up spilled hot sauce and beer, pitchers are landing on tables by the dozens. The aroma of grease and spilled Guinness drifts through the bar. And then voices hush as the replay rolls. Jackson Dart, the rookie quarterback for the Giants, making his first start, connecting on a very clutch drive. Someone yells out some obscure stat, someone else yells out, "The future is now!" And then it confirms touchdown. Roars, hollers, you got glasses clinking together like church bells, strangers are high-fiving and hugging, a few leap to their feet, and someone you just met becomes a teammate in that very moment. The TVs hum, but you can hardly hear them. Your ears are ringing with cheers and laughter and joy. Because for these few hours, this game owns this room, and everyone belongs to it. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to another episode of Sportly. Each week, we discuss lesser-known sports history, iconic events, notable athletes, and impactful moments on and off the field. Moments that, all too often, fall to the sidelines of history. This week, we're going to take a closer look at American sports bars, one of my favorite things. The atmosphere that makes them so distinct, the history from early taverns to the rise of televised sports, their, quite frankly, exclusionary beginnings, and the growing efforts to create spaces that welcome everyone. I will say, just on a personal level, I pretty much live at my local. I have established a community in my neighborhood on the Upper East Side where I've lived on the same block for, at this point, more than 11 years. We've got a community of neighbors and locals and bartenders and patrons and sports fans. And, you know, we really are a little bit of a family. We've got Mets fans and Yankee fans. We've even got a couple of Red Sox fans in there, which is a little rough right now. But we're all there to kind of, you know, shoot the shit and talk sports and just really hang out. And, you know, they're the kind of people whom I love dearly. I've traveled with some of them. I've gone to Ireland with some of my bartenders who were some of my best friends. And really, you can't overstate the value of having a community space like your local bar. So today we're going to ask, how did sports bars come to be? Well, it started simple. People gathering in taverns to drink, you know, pour over newspapers, talk about the news of the day, and definitely talk sports. By the early 20th century, American bars even played broadcasts of baseball games over the radio. But these weren't quite sports bars yet. They were just neighborhood hangouts. And that all changed in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1933, after Prohibition ended, the Palermo family opened a tavern across the street from Sportsman's Park, which was home at the time to the St. Louis Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns. Paul and Mary Palermo were Sicilian immigrants who had already been in the restaurant business for quite some years. Before the tavern opened, they even sold bootleg liquor by pasting labels off of other products onto their contraband bottles. Anyone who's been in a cheap college bar knows that this practice still exists today. Their son, Jimmy, grew up in this environment, and he also developed a deep love for baseball. He served as a bat boy and later clubhouse manager for the Browns. He had dreams of making it as a professional umpire until World War II came knocking, and Jimmy was shipped off to England as an army medic. But once he returned from the war in 1946, Jimmy Palermo took over his parents' tavern with a new vision. He filled the place with sports memorabilia, photos, gloves, bats, jerseys, caps, and he began to turn an occasional haunt for sports fans and athletes into a shrine dedicated to the game of baseball. Jimmy also had personal connections to some really legendary players. He was related to Yogi Berra by marriage and friends with Ted Williams from his days with the Browns. I think here's where I should mention that I'm on the board of directors of the Yogi Berra Museum. Unsurprisingly, some of baseball's heaviest hitters started to become regulars, including Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig whenever they were in town to play St. Louis. Palermo's was perfectly placed to become something big, but there was just one ingredient missing. A year later, Jimmy installed 12-inch black and white televisions around the bar and filled the screens with baseball games. From that point on, Palermo's wasn't just a bar, it was the first American sports bar. It was a place where locals, athletes, and fans gathered for games, beers, and ballpark food. The game changer here was undoubtedly television. In the 1950s and 60s, most homes didn't have a TV yet, but sports broadcasting was definitely taking off. Bars across the country quickly bridged this gap and filled their own venues with TV sets where fans could gather and watch local games together. And while Palermo might be considered the first American sports bar, the claim of being the first modern American sports bar really goes to another venue, Legends in Long Beach, California. Founded in 1979 by retired NFL lineman Dennis Hara, Legends was the first establishment to use satellite technology. This allowed them to broadcast live sports not just locally, but from around the world. Legends went on to develop one of the largest private collections of sports memorabilia in the United States. This included everything from Shaquille O'Neal's autographed size 23 shoes to a pair of Muhammad Ali's signed boxing gloves to over 100 authentic signed baseballs and an actual 2001 Indy race car suspended from the ceiling. Think of it as the Planet Hollywood or the Hard Rock of sports. After Legends, sports bars began to emerge as a distinct category in the hospitality industry. The 1980s marked the opening of numerous dedicated sports bars, equipped with themed decor, multiple screens, and full, fattening menus. These venues capitalized on the growing popularity of televised sports, particularly football and baseball. And today, the sports bar is more than just a place to watch games. For the many who can't afford to go to games live, it's become essential to their viewing experience, a way to watch the game with fellow fans without being in the stadium itself. It's a cornerstone of American sports culture. Now, it's worth pausing here to ask, what actually makes a sports bar different from a regular bar? These days, that line can get blurry. Most American bars have TVs. You walk in pretty much anywhere, whether it's a nice cocktail lounge or a divey bar, and there's probably going to be a TV on. But I gotta tell you, there is a difference between a bar that just happens to have the game on and an actual sports bar. When my friends and I are trying to figure out where to go to watch a, let's say, playoff game, it matters if there's sound on. It matters if everyone there is going to be watching the game too. You're not trying to bother everybody, but you're going to be yelling at the TV probably. So you're looking for somewhere that is a dedicated sports bar. On a big game night, let's say the Super Bowl or March Madness or the World Cup, any bar can transform into a sports bar. And for a few hours, that energy shifts. Strangers become teammates, and the whole room lives and dies with every play. But the real difference lies in the experience and the dedication. A true sports bar doesn't just show the game, it builds its whole environment around it. Its decor and memorabilia, the layout of the space, even the menu can be designed to make sports central. And many sports bars go a step further and affiliate themselves with a specific team. Here in New York, we've got transplants from everywhere, so we've got bars for pretty much every fan base that didn't grow up here. Packers fans go to Kettle of Fish. Steelers fans go to Reservoir or Blondie's. Syracuse fans go to East End. Even Patriots fans have a place in New York, and they go to O'Hanlon's. And obviously, cities around the country have bars dedicated to their local teams. Red Sox diehards fill Bleacher Bar in Boston. Orioles fans descend on Pickles near Camden Yards in Baltimore. And in Chicago, you'll find Bears fans packing Butch McGuire's. In Miami, Heat fans gather at Black Market to ride every playoff run. Seattle, it's the 5 Point Cafe, which becomes a haven for Seahawks faithfuls on Sundays. These places become surrogate stadiums where fans can celebrate victories and suffer defeats together, surrounded by people who share their allegiance. And let's be honest, especially for football, but you can kind of say this about almost every sport nowadays, the viewing experience on TV, at home, or at a sports bar is often better than it is when you're actually at the game. In short, while any bar can host a game, only a sports bar makes the game its full identity. Now, for all of their cultural importance, sports bars and bars in general haven't always been universally welcoming spaces. For much of American history, public spaces like bars belonged unquestionably to straight white men. Immigrants and Americans of color were barred from white establishments, frequently as patrons, but also often as workers. Take the case of Louis Deal. In 1892, Cincinnati hotelier Frank Beck hired him as a bartender at the Atlas Hotel. Deal was unquestionably talented, but the press and white bartenders were outraged. A black man was serving white customers. Within days, the hotel was threatened with boycotts and smear campaigns. Beck caved and fired Deal, but the damage stuck and the hotel closed 2 months later. And this wasn't an isolated case. A few years before that, in Milwaukee, a white mob violently forced a black bartender named Benjamin Sheekles out of his job, nearly lynching him in the process. When segregation deepened, many black entrepreneurs built their own spaces. Taverns, liquor stores, and cafes flourished. In St. Louis, Dixie Liquor became a local institution in the 1940s. In Chicago, the Saratoga Cafe and Sportsman Lounge blended food, drinks, and sports long before the sports bar, quote unquote, was a household term. And it wasn't just Black Americans who faced barriers. Irish immigrants in the 19th century were shunned from many respectable saloons, so they opened their own working-class taverns, often near baseball stadiums in cities like New York and Boston. At McSorley's in Manhattan, Irish patrons gathered for beer and debate, while Irish-American baseball clubs helped link tavern culture directly to the nation's growing pastime. And it's interesting because our model for the modern American sports bar is basically the Irish pub. And while New York has the largest Irish diaspora, and anybody who knows me knows how much I love my Irish, that model has basically been replicated elsewhere in the United States, even in places that don't have a ton of Irish people. But German immigrants did something similar with beer halls, which became hubs for lager and athletics. Many sponsored local Turnvereins, the members of which are still known as turners, which were gymnastic and sports clubs that tied physical culture to community life. Latino communities also made their mark. In LA during the 1940s, Mexican-American cantinas like El Cholo Cafe weren't just restaurants, they were gathering points for soccer fans, and especially for boxing, a sport with deep ties to Mexican and Mexican-American identity. Later, Puerto Rican and Dominican immigrants in New York gravitated toward neighborhood taverns in Washington Heights and the Bronx, rallying around Caribbean baseball stars who played for the Yankees and Mets. I can personally say, as somebody who grew up in Washington Heights, that Coogan's was the spot, and unfortunately has closed, but it was the spot for decades, and it was where local politicians, local athletes, Manny Ramirez, who grew up in the Heights, everyone would come together and watch some baseball at Coogan's, and it was a cornerstone of the community for sure. Jewish Americans were also excluded from many athletic and social clubs, so they established their own. Jewish-owned taverns in cities like Chicago and Cleveland became gathering spots for boxing fans, a sport in which Jewish fighters like Max Baer and Benny Leonard were national icons. And on the West Coast, Asian Americans also built their own cafes and social clubs in Chinatowns. In San Francisco, the Chinese Playground, established in 1927, became a hub for basketball and table tennis, while nearby social halls provided food, drinks, and community for athletes and fans who had nowhere else to go. So whether through Irish baseball pubs, German beer halls, Latino cantinas, Jewish boxing taverns, or Asian social clubs, marginalized groups have kept finding ways to link sports and social life, reshaping American bar culture in the process. Now, the story of women's access to bars as welcoming social spaces is a much more complicated one. In the 19th and much of the 20th century, public drinking by women was seen as scandalous, an attack on morality, class, and respectability. It was just unthinkable that a woman would want to discuss sports and have a drink by herself or with friends in such places. Many bars simply banned them outright with signs that read "men only" or "no unescorted ladies served." Even in the 1960s, most bars refused to serve women. A woman who walked in alone could be labeled a bar girl, assumed to be flirting for drinks in exchange for sexual favors. I've got to say that somehow this mentality does persist to today, because there is a bar on the Upper East Side that I will not name that is, quite frankly, just a shitty bar, that a couple of years ago came under fire because they weren't allowing women to sit at the bar and just have a glass of wine by themselves because they assumed that they were working girls. Politicians and police doubled down, targeting single women in bars as a moral threat. And then, in 1965, a young New Yorker named Alan Stillman tried something different. He wasn't a restaurateur. He was just a guy in his 20s living on the Upper East Side who wanted to meet women. So he went to his local establishment and he was like, what if we put some Tiffany lamps in here and some flowery wallpaper and just made the joint a little bit more appealing to women? And thus was born the first TGI Fridays. Yes, TGI Fridays was not the fried food, kind of crappy, fast casual place that we kind of know of it today. It was the country's first singles bar, designed to lure women in with casual dining, affordable drinks, and a much more relaxed atmosphere than the smoky saloons of men only. And it worked. TGI Fridays became a sensation and spawned a whole wave of singles bars across the country. This wasn't entirely liberation. It was commodification. Women were encouraged to show up, but not necessarily for their own sake. They were the draw. They were the promise that kept men coming in and buying drinks. To this day, that persists. We've all been to ladies' night, right? But for many women, these spaces still carried the same risks of objectification and unwanted advances and just a lack of safety. True change came not from gimmicks, but from activism. In 1967, Syracuse law student Karen DeCrow staged a drink-in at the Rainbow Lounge near campus. Management's response was to rip out almost every bar stool and slash the occupancy limit from 100 to 6. 2 years later, DeCrow and attorney Faith Seidenberg took the fight to court after trying to grab a drink at McSorley's in New York and being turned away. Turns out McSorley's chose the wrong women to trifle with because DeCrow and Seidenberg were both on the board of the National Organization for Women. They filed a federal lawsuit against the bar, which hadn't admitted a single woman in 116 years, and they won. Soon after, New York City Mayor John Lindsay signed a bill banning sex discrimination in all public places. Now, remember that the 1970s began with the passage of Title IX and the widely televised Battle of the Sexes, bringing women's sports deeply into the public consciousness. In 1973, when Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs were battling it out on the court, 90 million people from around the world watched them on TV. And many of them were American women, sitting in bars with a drink in their hands. Again, on a personal note, TGI Fridays became eventually a really well-known bar in the Upper East Side called Baker Street, which unfortunately is no longer open, but was one of my locals and was a really great place to hang out with the community. Like I said, our regulars in the neighborhood. It was actually the bar where the Tom Cruise movie Cocktail was filmed.
Now, what was it that you ordered? A martini. What's in that?
The bar is exactly the same as it was when it was TGI Fridays. The layout of the space is the same. And we used to have some famous neighbors stop by. Bill Cowher, former coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is now an NFL commentator on TV. So shout out to Baker Street. Now, being openly queer was another barrier for sports lovers who just wanted a comfortable, safe place to cheer and rage about their games. For most of the 20th century, LGBTQ plus patrons were either barred outright or targeted by police raids in bars and taverns. So queer communities built their own venues. Gay bars, lesbian bars, queer cafes, they became lifelines of safety and solidarity. Most famously, the Stonewall Inn in New York. Sports weren't always the centerpiece, but they were never far away. Softball leagues, bowling nights, and pool tournaments became popular draws for patrons long excluded from mainstream athletic spaces. By the 1980s and 90s, some LGBTQ plus bars began embracing televised sports more directly, often as a way to carve out new traditions. In San Francisco, for instance, bars in the Castro district would host game nights for the 49ers, while in Chicago, Sidetrack became a place where queer sports fans could gather for everything from March Madness to Olympic figure skating. And today, explicitly queer-friendly sports bars have emerged across the country. Venues like Boxers in New York, Pitchers in Washington, D.C., and High Tops in San Francisco blend the classic trappings of a sports bar, multiple screens, team memorabilia, beer on tap, with the safety and celebration of queer identity. And I will also say that the year that I lived in LA, I really struggled to find a sports bar, frankly, just because LA. But I was in West Hollywood, that's where I was living, and WeHo is a heavily gay community. And my favorite sports bar was Jim. I could go to Jim, it's a gay sports bar, and just talk sports with, some dudes without being hit on. It was great. All of this struggle to find a tangible space and community in America's sports culture brings us to today. In 2025, a new era of sports bars has come into existence, one where these traditionally male establishments showcase mostly women's sports and welcome patrons of all stripes and colors with open arms. As recently as 4 years ago, most bars only played men's games, no matter what else was happening. And the argument was that no one wanted to watch women's games. Jenny Nguyen, a lifelong basketball fan in Portland, ran up against that reality when she tried to watch the NCAA women's finals with friends.
None of the TVs had the game on. I started Googling women's sports bars, and I came up empty-handed.
So, in 2022, Nguyen decided to change the rules of the game. She opened the Sports Bra, the first bar in the United States dedicated entirely to women's sports. From the start, her vision was bigger than a bar. Every screen is tuned to women's leagues, from the WNBA to the NWSL to the WTA. The drinks menu features beer and liquor from women-run breweries and distilleries. The walls are lined with women's sports memorabilia. And most importantly, the space was built to be inclusive for women, queer fans, families, kids, and men who want to support a different kind of sports culture. The community response was overwhelming.
The idea of the sports bra was so welcome in our community that people came out of the woodworks like nobody's business. So it was hundreds and hundreds of pairs of hands that helped create this space.
Within 8 months, the sports bra was on track for $1 million in revenue. Patrons described the experience as validating, empowering, even emotional. One explained to CBC News.
It means that I can come in here, I can scream at a TV, I can be loud, I can be comfortable. I can ask questions if I don't understand what's going on in the game. I can feel comfortable asking and not get eye rolls or being why do you even care about, sports?
The success sparked a movement. Across the country, women's sports bars began popping up. Rough and Tumble in Seattle, Title IX Sports Grill in Phoenix, Raise the Bar in Columbus, Set the Bar in Omaha, the 99ers Sports Bar in Denver. In Austin, owners Deborah Hallam and Marlene Duplessis opened the 1972 pub, named for the year that Title IX was enacted. As they told Fox 7 in Austin, their goal was
to give female athletes and women's sports a platform, a place to put them on a pedestal, and to grow the interest and the love for women's sports.
Whenever we wanted to watch a women's sports game, we had to ask the pub to put it on. And then whenever they did put it on, there was no sound. Or as soon as a men's game would start, they would just switch it over.
On opening day during March Madness, hundreds of people lined up for cocktails named after icons like Billie Jean King and Simone Biles. And this boom coincides with the explosive growth of women's sports themselves. Women's college basketball and the WNBA have drawn record-breaking TV audiences. The NWSL continues to expand into new cities. Women's softball, hockey, and volleyball are drawing unprecedented attention. As demand soars, these bars are becoming the cultural home courts for fans across the country. What began with one Portland bar has grown into a national network of welcoming spaces, places where cheering for women's sports isn't just allowed, it's the whole point. Everyone watches women's sports. Running a bar in America today is not easy. Rents keep rising, there are staffing shortages, the soaring cost of food and alcohol have squeezed margins tighter than ever. At the same time, consumer behavior is shifting. Younger people are drinking less, spending more selectively, and often choosing to watch games at home on giant TVs or streaming services instead of heading out on a weeknight. To survive, sports bars have had to rethink their playbooks. Some lean on craft beers and upscale dining, others double down on creating experiences that can't be replicated in a living room. Tom's Watch Bar, for example, has grown to 18 locations by combining an elevated menu, lobster tacos and craft beers, with 100 wall-to-wall screens offering a 360-degree game day experience. Just as important, most of its restaurants are planted right next to stadiums and arenas, tapping directly into the surge of fans drawn to the entertainment districts now being built around major sports venues. But not every sports bar can pull off that kind of strategy. Independent neighborhood establishments, mom-and-pop places, the kind of places that have anchored communities for decades, often struggle to keep pace. Without the capital to renovate or expand, many face shrinking crowds and rising bills. We can't overstate the effect of rising rents, especially in places like New York. My former local, O'Flanagan's, was open for more than 30 years and had to shut down in 2018 because of the rent. Others have closed entirely in the wake of the pandemic, while the ones that are still open limp along on reduced hours, hoping that a big playoff run or a local rivalry night will be enough to fill the seats. I can tell you that my bartender friends are always real happy when the Mets and the Yankees are in the playoffs. Still, the best sports bars remain more than just places to watch the game. They're essential third spaces. They're gathering grounds where people find belonging in collective celebration and heartbreak. From Palermo's in the 1930s to Legends in the 1970s to the sports bra and its many successors today, sports bars have continually reshaped what it means to be part of American sporting culture. And if history has shown us anything, it's that the American sports bar always finds a way to endure. Sports bars have survived prohibition, segregation, and pandemics. And they've reinvented themselves time and again because the need for a place to gather, to cheer, and to belong is simply too essential to ever disappear. Thanks so much for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after as we dive into another great story. And if you've got thoughts or suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at kavitha@immigrantlypod.com. And if you've been enjoying our show, leave us a review at the podcast app of your choice. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Our executive producer is Sadia Khan. Written by Emmanuel Monahan. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly.